Welcome, folks, to this edition of Meet America, where we film Americans that are really, truly making America great. And in my opinion, what makes America great is our wildlife, our beautiful places, and the people who are trying to preserve our environment and our health and our country, the integrity of our country. And so here is John Cox, someone I admire greatly, who is trying to save the wildlife of our country, and particularly the wild horses and wolves and bears. So welcome to Meet America, John. Why don't you tell us your story?
Well, there's not much of a story to tell other than we have some problems here in America, and it's called human problems. And in other words, the horses aren't the problem on our public and federal lands right now. It's the human problem that is making the decisions, the administrators that are making bogus decisions, and basically the single priority of what their ecology standards are that meet no scientific criteria. And the references are totally bogus half the time. So we have a big problem in defending the horses. This is an American quarter horse. This is something that within the cowboys' language, we respect the horses respect us, and that's what made America great, is that relationship between the cowboy and the horse, not the way it is now where cowboys are rounding up, abusing, and shooting horses. That's not the reality of being a cowboy. That's the reality of being an animal abuser, and a very serious animal abuser at that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a single species paradigm, which is cattle, which is, as I said, not backed up by any kind of references, not backed up by any kind of science, not backed up by ecology. And then we have the standards of ecology that says diversity is first and foremost within our public lands, our ranges, and it's backed up by good science, good people with good hearts, good researchers, and good references that actually reflect back onto the lands with proof and evidence. Right now we find that the Bureau of Land Management, who's in charge of managing our public lands, as a lot of people out there are smirking right now because we all know better, and they're developing criteria where they can round up horses or kill off wildlife through wildlife services, yet another corrupt agency, and basically liquidating our life on this planet, and at a really drastic pace. And we have to put a stop to that. This is what horse advocates do, this is what wildlife advocates do, and this is what environmentalists do. We want to put a stop to this devastation that's on this earth right now, and that's happening by our federal government. The BLM serves as just an excellent example on what they're doing with the horses. The overpopulation myth, because quite frankly, there's no sound and credible evidence that backs up an overpopulation of wild horses on our public lands whatsoever. It simply doesn't exist. Babe agrees with me. She knows. Horses know. But that criteria between the cowboy and the horse is respect toward the horse respects the cowboy. And that's all there is to it. It's that simple.
Well, give us some examples of BLM corruption that you've uncovered. You are a journalist, right?
Yeah. Well, we have several situations that are ongoing right now. I mean, they recently killed 4 horses over there in eastern Nevada. Now,
on Madeline Pickens' property?
On Madeline Pickens' property.
And it was the BLM itself, right? Shooting him in the gut.
Yeah, they admitted.
Shooting in the gut, folks. That's the most painful, slow death. These are BLM hired officials by our tax dollars, and this is what they're getting away with? Are they being convicted, or are they being fired, or are they just allowed to get away with this?
Well, we know that we know even as hunters or any kind of ethical people that have ethics, morals, that we see within the Bureau of Land Management a real decay in the very principles of life itself. Now, you gut shoot an animal, we know, even since I've been 6, 7 years old, for crying out loud, that she's hungry. We find that gut shooting an animal is a slow torture and it's a slow death. and only a very sadistic would even do that. Now we find a lot of bullet holes in the rear end of those horses that were shot by the BLM. 2 BLM employees, they admit it, and they cover it up by saying they euthanized the horses. Euthanasia is an entirely different situation.
Right.
It doesn't involve shooting in the gut, and it doesn't involve several rounds of bullets being hit in the rear end of a horse.
Yeah.
It just doesn't.
So are they
that.
getting convicted? I mean, what is happening to these employees?
Well, what they'll do is they'll probably cover it up, and what I mean by cover up, they'll deny everything because they feel that, well, they don't have any responsibility toward being punished. They never have up to this point because the Justice Department has turned their mission statement around to defending government employees that do bad rather than the taxpayers and protect the taxpayers for crimes against our horses. These are our horses. We pay taxes. We pay the system in order to have a system to manage our horses. The Wild Horse and Burro Act was voted on by a majority of the legislators because they got so much feedback back in 1971 by the American public. It was the American public that got together and said, enough of this demoralizing and abusive situations in management toward wild horses. We don't have that anymore. We have conflicts of interest. We have a single priority of, well, yeah, and she's frustrated too.
Okay.
But anyway, let's go do a transition here. Let's start talking about why all this exists, and let's start talking about, we're talking about grazing permit holders on public lands and federal lands. We're talking about they sell less than 1% of their commercial product domestically in the United States. Then we go to the fact that there's only about 4% that actually in ranching that hold grazing permits domestically. And then we go to the amount of beef on a yearly basis that's thrown out from the grocery markets in regard to becoming beyond regulatory holding, whatever they want to call it, but they're actually throwing away the beef. So, and at that 34%, or
why are they throwing away the beef?
Because it goes bad on the shelves. So it's regulatory. Right now we're getting a lot of callbacks on salmonella and the beef product because they put it in freezers because they're producing an overabundance of beef. Yes, we have a human problem. It's a human problem, not a wild horse problem.
You're on.
So what we have is, I kind of went quiet there for a second for the simple fact that there's a level of, all of us are getting relatively upset about a situation that is developing. And that situation is the shooting of wild horses. Whether or not they call them feral, whether or not they call them wild, feral horses, if they get on private lands, are to go back to, and considered wild, but go back to the closest HMA or back to public lands. They're protected by the Wild Horse and Burro Act. There's nothing anywhere, nothing that says anything else. And the fact is that federal judges have also agreed with us. The fact is that we have statutes, we have law precedents, we have things established in court. The BLM, once again, is the most litigated federal agency in the United States history. They've lost so many times, but because, again, the Justice Department defends BLM employees rather than the common taxpayer, which I'm not quite sure when that mission statement switched, but it did, they're not responsible to report to anybody. So they can sit there, despite the fact they lose a court case. All of a sudden we have people that can act as irresponsible and childish as they want. They can ignore us. They can be enemies with the taxpayer, the people that pays them, that gives them the money for their damn budgets, and we're pissed. It's like we're just pissed. We're just done with this whole crap.
But how do we deal with it? That's the problem. You have judges that aren't dealing with it. You have
Well, they're dealing with it. The judges are dealing with it. They're giving, as far as they can go, they're giving us the precedents and the statutes to go ahead and take BLM to task.
But then BLM, well,
Ignores it.
you go to try to tell BLM that, and BLM doesn't obey the judges. So BLM is above the law.
Well, the BLM employees are told that they don't have to because nobody has been taken to task in regard to the fines, to imprisonment. They're shooting horses, for crying out loud, and they call it euthanasia, and it's not. It's gut shooting a horse, as I went over that at the beginning, is that's sadistic. That's abuse. That's straight up animal abuse. Two employees do that, we want to see them in prison. We want them to go to prison. Period. They're bad people. They're sadists.
Right.
You know, and it's excuse me for the rant, but this is uncalled for. This is stuff that doesn't need to happen.
Right. Well, it shouldn't happen in our so-called great country. And unless Americans start standing up individually and saying, we're not going to allow you to do this with our tax dollars. First of all, now under Zinke, the Department of Interior Secretary, he's now allowing wild horses to be bought at $25 a head. At $25 a head, the kill buyers can buy them. They sign some kind of release form that they're not going to send them to slaughter, but there's no teeth in it, so there's no investigation going on. So our horses on every level, our wild horses and our wildlife, is being disseminated, going extinct, and this horrible corruption, this rot that is within this agency that manages our public lands. The only thing I can see, public, when you see this, the people that care and are watching this interview, please boycott all beef on public lands.
Well,
don't buy from those supermarkets. Go on Google in your area and search private ranchers and ask them, where can I buy your beef? If you have to eat beef, ask that. And that way you'll put a dent in the pocketbook of these welfare ranchers. That's the only tool I see we have.
No, we have different tools. We have the ability to go to our, fortunately in America, we have the ability to go to our legislators, and we have the ability to give them calls. We have the ability to fill mailbags with complaints. I mean, if a legislator is sitting there and he gets 5 mailbags full of mail of complaints within a few days, he knows or she knows they got a problem.
We've been doing that for years.
No.
Oh, yeah.
I've gotten in legislators' assistants and that kind of thing have told me they hardly get any mail.
They get lots of calls. When I call, people say that they get a lot of calls. People aren't writing letters anymore because it takes 6 weeks for them to go through the process.
They get mail bags and that kind of thing, and that's what I'm told. I'm saying this from a perspective of assistants in the legislators' offices and that kind of thing. One thing that they hate is a letter. They don't like letters because they have to start responding to letters. When they start responding to 3 or 4 or 5 mailbags full of letters, then they know they have a problem. There's no ifs, ands, buts. This isn't even a debate.
Well, yeah.
Go. Okay, so Babe and I both agree that there's a level of things going on now that we basically, not only do we not agree with, but is very debatable that whether these government agencies are, legal, number one. If they're doing things in accord to the legal laws, the statutes, and they like to make us believe that they are, but indeed they're not. And that's the problem. What you get is a BLM employee that's sitting there. I've come to the conclusion that when I ask them a question and all of a sudden if they put a smile on their face and they look like a chipmunk with nuts in their cheeks, then I'm sitting there thinking, oh, here comes a lie. And other people have seen that too. It's almost the exact same explanation. It's just they're just going to sit there and what I understand is they're going to do their 3 options for from the morning meeting, and that's a situation where they'll come out and they'll line number 1 if that doesn't work, line number 2, and if that doesn't work, line number 3. If that doesn't work, then they'll go ahead and either get you mad or they'll hang up themselves. That's their postscript. That's just what they do.
Would it help for people that are listening to this program to call this BLM office here and complain that they're not doing anything?
Oh, absolutely.
So let me give you the number, folks. Go get a pencil and a piece of paper, those of you who care, and call this BLM office in Kimberly, Oregon, is it?
No, this particular office is in Prineville, Oregon.
In Pineville, Oregon.
It's a district office.
It's a district office. And just listen and watch how they slough you off and try to tell you that these are feral horses. Well, feral horses under the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act are wild horses. And you can go and do a Google search for Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act and you'll read it yourself. And I would suggest that you call this number, 541-416, hold on, 6864. That's 541-416-6864. And just say that you heard this on the program. There's 200 plus wild horses that are being shot out there on BLM property, and they're saying that it isn't. It's in Kimberly, Oregon, outside of Kimberly, Oregon.
Lakeview Ranch.
Near the Lakeview Ranch, and it is under suspect. They've been investigated before, according to the sheriff's office, that they have been investigated before for similar situations.
Right.
And so unless you people who really care about keeping America great, keeping America wild, protecting what is most beautiful about our country, instead of just saying it's great, doing great things individually, picking up that phone, you will have done your part. So once again, I'm going to give you that number. It's 541-416. Hold on, I gotta go back here. And it's 541-416-6864. So write that down, folks, and give them a call. And I want to thank you so much for those of you who are watching and care. Got any more to say, John?
How much time do I have left?
You got quite a lot of time yet.
Well, let's talk about the reasoning behind this. Welfare ranching is what we call people on public lands and federal lands that hold a grazing permit. But these grazing permits are ruled by law. There's contract obligations that they do have. Now, we do know that this particular welfare rancher receives, within his grazing permit capacity, a few hundreds of thousands of dollars in a year. And we're kind of we're concerned about that, because if they're shooting what they call feral horses, then that means they're not shooting off their ranch, these horses. These are horses that are roaming out there, and I don't really care what reasoning they give. These are on our public lands. We want to see horses on our public lands, not cattle.
Yeah.
And the problem is we have a human problem, again, at the amount of money that they receive and actually promote devastation and destruction of our public lands. The devastation is in wildlife, for crying out loud. They hire wildlife services and they come around and they kill everything in sight, any kind of animal, any kind of small rodent, any kind of whatever, in order to protect the cattle. Well, that's not protecting the cattle, that's disrupting the wildlife system and the ecology health of that area. Within water capacity too. All of a sudden we have these out-of-state corporations out of state of Oregon that are using Oregon water to even sublease some of the land to some of their buddies out of Nevada or California or Wyoming or wherever for their cattle. And Oregonians have to go dry. And we have to, we don't have a big surplus of water here and that kind of thing. And when it's going to out-of-state cattle, well, that kind of speaks for itself. So the lack of integrity that we have within the welfare ranching system is very tremendous. And it's less than 1% of the commercial product goes to market. We have a glut here of beef. We have recalls going on now of beef. we have a 34% disposal rate. So just through those numbers alone, you can see we don't really have a capacity to accept this grazing permit on public and federal lands because it's useless. Where, you know, in feeding another country and that kind of thing, I don't mind that, but not at taxpayer expense. These welfare ranchers are going to have to run on their own instead of being subsidized in the millions of dollars on a yearly basis for making their beef, and they pocket all the money. And
well,
you know, they don't,
yeah.
all that subsidy of taxpayers are definitely basically subsidizing these welfare ranchers.
Well, the fact that under Zinke, you know, each horse, just to cost for the helicopter man to round up each horse, according to BLM's statistics, which I don't believe, it's $360 per horse.
No way. No,
okay,
that's not
well,
even
that's
true.
what BLM's on their BLM site. That's what they say. Now I know it's lying, but that's what they say. Anyway, because I looked it up, and that's what it says. Okay, so. Then they're turning around and selling them to private people to make a huge profit at our loss, our tax dollars loss, when we're paying thousands of dollars, $5 a day to keep a horse in holding and $2 a day in pasture. And that's another, it's $27,000 a day to keep the 49,000 wild horses, according to BLM's own statistics on their site. Now,
Well, that's
I know,
socioeconomics.
yeah,
That
but
isn't
I
anything.
know that BLM lies. I've caught them lying. I've got a letter from former Congressman Sam Farr, asking for the Department of Justice to prosecute BLM employees for illegally selling 1,700 wild horses to slaughter. And they suspect thousands more. I have that letter. Okay, we have asked the Department of Justice to prosecute BLM, but no one touches them. So that's the whole rotten caboodle of our government. How are we going to fix it? We're going to fix it by the pocketbook in one way, letters, like you say, calling, showing this government that we do care about our country, that we're not just a bunch of slugs sitting in front of TV watching the show. And unless we do that, it's going to come back on us. And it is coming back on us. It's coming back on us through them robbing us of Medicare and proper medical services. It's coming back on us by taxing the poor and giving tax breaks to the rich. It's blatant in our faces, folks. So the horses are our spiritual messengers. They're the ones that are showing us the corruption. They're the ones that are suffering. And I want to thank you so much. Do you have anything else to say?
Yeah. The fact is that we have the procurement documents, and we have, actually anybody can go on to govspend.com and govspend.org and govspend.gov, and you can find these procurement documents. And the documents that we got, for example, from Murder's Creek, that was a bait and trap movement. That was $1,200 per horse. We found 43 dead in the inventory sheet that we also got from FOIA from the BLM office in Denver. So we can show beyond a doubt that the roundups, for example, on a basic roundup is anywhere from $850 to $1,000 on a easily rounded up horse, to $1,200 to $1,300 on a little bit more difficult horse. And we also see the abuses of a lot of dead horses on each roundup. They want to say that 2% is okay of abuse and death rates on the roundups. Well, we say that's bunk, because you talk to a cowboy and that kind of thing. We're going to have to remember that cowboys aren't anything without horses, and horses aren't anything without cowboys. That's the bottom line on that. No legitimate cowboy abuses horses and gives a 2% anything on rounding up horses, even if they're wild. That's a bogus number. That's BLM, because they're making excuses for their helicopter and bait and trap movements that are basically abusive and done by incompetent and contractors that have no experience with horses or little to no experience with horses. So we have some problems with that because they can walk away with anywhere from $450,000 on a small roundup and possibly another $850,000 to $1 million on a large roundup. These are just you know, rounding up. So this is ridiculous. This is to say that $360 per horse. That's no, that doesn't exist. Never has, and that's according to their own documents. So, and the procurement officers we can take to task because there's no environmental assessments that are legal in order to okay these roundups. And there's no evidence to show that they should be having emergency roundups. They have no evidence, they just do it and say it's an emergency. People don't question it, they don't do anything, oh, emergency. So they got around the environmental assessments. Well, no, they need evidence and they don't have it, period. So the next roundup that happens, and they say it's an emergency, ask for evidence. And the next roundup they have, and they say they have an EA, ask for evidence within the EA. Where's the evidence? Where's the fact? Where's the reference material? And because they just don't have it. And that's what's difficult, and that's why we totally object to the roundups that are going on today. Not only is it costly to the taxpayer, but it eliminates programs. When you're sitting there looking at an educational program or a veteran with no limbs, and we realize that he just got back from a war, he needs those limbs, and that program has been cut because a welfare rancher wants wild horses off the range for a single priority basis of cattle being on the range that isn't backed up by science. And science will back up a horse way before cattle. It's true, it's another hooven animal, but the fact is, ungulates do not act the same over public lands. A large hooved animal is going to do more damage than the hooves that are here, for example, on Babe. Those are standard hooves there, as a matter of fact. So they don't, it's not the harm that they do. And at Murders Creek, Oregon, it was shown by a federal judge that, and actually she got pretty irritated at BLM for lying. She made the statement that they did lie and she was tired of it, but that it was cattle that done the damage there, even though the grazing permit holder was trying to say that it was the horses that was out in that area that done the damage. Well, they lost that litigation, and then the Bureau of Land Management and the Forestry had gotten together and they usurped that law knowingly. But the fact is that statute still exists, and the truth still exists that, you know, what's going on here. Why are they not regulating the cattle, which are an indigenous species, and the horses, which they can't prove is not an indigenous species?
Well, they can prove it through the fossil evidence. For instance, in Carlsbad, California, they found fossils dating 6,000 years ago.
Well, they can prove that it is, that they're indigenous.
That they're indigenous, yeah.
Definitely.
But cattle are not, they're from Eurasia.
Yeah.
And, you know, so...
Well, Siberian connection and that kind of thing. It's all, when you start running DNA on these horses and that kind of thing, you'll find that there's an X factor that they say that's non-identifiable because they don't want to identify it. And the fact is that it goes back to Eurasia, and the same as a lot of the, well, about an hour up the road here, and over in Kennewick, Washington, the Kennewick Man, Lucy, you know, these have all surpassed the Clovis Man and that kind of thing. And what we see are, there was jaws, a horse's jaw in one of the, up in Alaska, I believe, in Mariz, who's an archaeologist that put everything in a big uproar, because that predated not only the Clovis Man, it also predated the existence of horses. So, and the jaw was there. It was tooled. It wasn't like scraped with saber-toothed teeth or claws or anything else. It was tooled. The meat was taken off the jaw by a sharp tool at that time, and that kind of freaked all the archaeologists off.
Well,